Eat these 6 fruits daily. After 60, they quietly boost longevity without you noticing. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking time not just to watch, but to take care of the body that's carried you this far. It started with something small. George forgot where he put the keys again, 3rd time that week. But this time, instead of brushing it off, he just stood there in the hallway, staring at the old side table with a strange chill crawling up his spine. He could feel something shifting beneath the surface, like the quiet click of a gear slipping out of place. Something wasn't right. Outside, it was early autumn in Oregon. Golden leaves blew in soft spirals down the gravel road leading to the miller's front porch. The scent of wood smoke drifted in through the window screens. In the kitchen, the familiar sound of the coffee maker hissed and gurgled like always. Helen George's wife, of 43 years, was humming gently, wearing her navy cardigan and preparing 2 plates of scrambled eggs. The kitchen was warm, familiar, but George, sitting at the table, stared into his coffee like it held a message he couldn't quite read. The quiet around him felt unusually heavy, like a silence that had meaning. George Miller was 68, retired postal worker. A man who believed in order lists, early morning's tools, neatly stored on pegboards in the garage. He was proud of that steadiness, the reliability of being needed. But lately, he had begun to feel like a piece of furniture in his only present, but fading. His knees ached more than they used to. His breath shortened at the top of the stairs. His thoughts, once as sharp as a paper cutter, had started to drift, especially at night. He hadn't told Helen any of this directly, but he knew she noticed. His fear wasn't about illness. It wasn't about a diagnosis. It was about disappearing, bit by bit, into forgetfulness, into fatigue, into being one of those old men who sit quietly at family dinners while the world continues without them. George had always been strong, reliable. Now he felt himself slipping, and he didn't know how to stop it. He tried, quietly without fanfare. He started drinking more water. He walked the driveway every morning. He bought a notepad to jot down reminders, but nothing stuck. Each new habit felt erased by morning fog or an afternoon slump. During meals, he forced a smile, but Helen saw through it. She didn't ask, not directly, but she began to change the way she cooked. More greens, less meat. And then one morning, without saying a word, she lined up 6 fruits on the kitchen counter, each one carefully washed and sliced. Blueberries, avocados, pomegranate seeds, papaya, an apple, a kiwi halved and gleaming green. Just try them, she said simply, pushing the plate toward him. George, tired and skeptical, picked up a blueberry and popped it into his mouth. The moment that broke him wasn't dramatic. He was simply tying his shoes and suddenly had to sit down, lightheaded, dizzy, his heart racing. It passed quickly, but left something behind. That night after dinner, George found Helen on the back porch. He stood next to her in silence for a long while, watching the trees sway. "I think something's wrong," he said at last. His voice cracked. She didn't flinch. She just reached out and took his hand. The next morning, Helen had a plan. A quiet, consistent plan. She handed George a printed list, each item underlined. 6 fruits daily. No skipping. No discussion. Blueberries to protect the brain. Avocados for the heart. Pomegranates for blood flow. Papaya for digestion. Apples to fight inflammation. Kiwis for immune strength. George looked at the list and sighed. He didn't believe in superfoods or miracle cures, but he believed in Helen. So he nodded. As he chewed the first piece of papaya that morning, he gazed out the window toward the trees. A leaf spun slowly down from an oak branch and landed on the grass like it had been placed there. Maybe, he thought, just maybe something could change. He didn't feel any different, not yet. But the idea that he could start again, even in small ways, started to stir something inside him. George didn't expect a transformation, but he hoped for something quieter, something gradual. He wasn't chasing youth. He was chasing clarity, presence, the ability to still be who he was, fully, not partially. As the fruit's sweetness touched his tongue, he glanced sideways at Helen, who pretended not to watch him. He smiled softly. This wasn't about diet. It wasn't about antioxidants or vitamins or blood sugar. Not entirely. This was about holding on to what mattered, staying in the moment, staying George. And if you're past 60, if you've ever stood in your own hallway and forgotten why you walked into the room, then you'll understand this isn't about changing everything. It's about quietly choosing to begin again, with 6 fruits, with hope, and maybe like George, you're not looking for miracles, just a way back to feeling whole again. George didn't expect much when he walked into Dr. Latimer's office that Wednesday. Just the usual blood pressure, a few jokes about aging, maybe a lecture about cholesterol. But the look on Dr. Latimer's face when he scanned the results felt heavier than normal. Measured, deliberate, he adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and placed the folder down. George, he said, you're not sick, but you're not where you should be either. The sentence hung in the air, like steam off a winter lake. George shifted in his chair. Waiting for specifics, Dr. Latimer explained. Nothing was broken. Nothing alarming. But everything was slowing. Memory markers, cellular, repair, circulation, energy, metabolism. It's like your body's dimming the lights earlier than it should, he said, offering a metaphor that somehow made it worse. As George drove home, silence filled the cab of the truck. The road curved through the same pine-lined streets he'd driven for 30 years. But it felt different, dimmer, maybe slower. He remembered an article Helen once left out on the table, How to Live Past 90 and Enjoy It. He hadn't read it. He wished he had. Back at home, Helen was in the garden, her sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt. She looked up when he pulled in, but didn't wave, just watched him for a second longer than usual. George didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, keys in hand, staring at the mailbox like it might offer a better future. Over dinner, he finally told her, not everything, just enough. The doctor's words. The fatigue, the sense that something invisible was quietly erasing him from the inside. Helen put down her fork. Then we fight it, she said. George almost laughed. With what? She got up, walked to the fridge, opened the crisper drawer, and pulled out a pomegranate. With this, she said, The next morning, the fruit bowl was full again, overflowing actually. Blueberries, papayas, avocados, sliced apples in a Ziploc kiwis, cut and ready. She had written little notes on sticky tabs next to each brain heart digestion immunity. George stared at it like a man who just received instructions from a map he hadn't realized he was following. He committed, not with fanfare or speeches, but with quiet discipline. Each morning after tying his shoes carefully. Now, he would sit at the table, the same table he had read newspapers at for decades, and eat his 6 fruits. The first week was frustrating. No changes, no sudden burst of energy, no clarity of thought, just the same aching knees and scattered mind. He missed toast, missed bacon, missed giving up. But Helen was there every day. And so was the bowl. The second week, he noticed something strange. He found the car keys twice in the right place. He remembered a neighbor's name he hadn't said in months. He tied his shoes without needing to sit down. Small things, quiet shifts, and then came the setback. It was a Sunday morning. Church had just ended. George bent down to tie a loose shoelace before getting into the truck, and a sharp pain stabbed through his lower back. He winced. By the time they got home, the old fatigue had returned. That evening, he accidentally left the oven on and forgot the name of a documentary he and Helen had watched just the night before. The fear came rushing back like a cold tide. Maybe it had all been false hope. Maybe this decline couldn't be reversed. Maybe the light was just fading, no matter what he ate. That night, George stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection. His face was familiar, but distant. He thought about how quickly life can shift. One minute, you're the strong one, the provider, the dependable. The next, you're searching for signs that you still belong. The next morning, Helen made him breakfast. The bowl was there, just like always. She didn't say anything, just kissed him on the shoulder as she passed. George looked at the fruit and hesitated. But he didn't walk away. He sat down, picked up a spoon, and sliced into the papaya. That's when he realized something. The battle wasn't against illness. It was against surrender. It was about showing up to the small moments. Showing up for your own life, so he kept going. By the end of the week, the stiffness had eased. His mood lightened. He walked further with the dog, laughed more during their evening shows. And when Helen asked if he remembered the name of their first camping site from the 80s, he said, Silver Falls, without missing a beat. They both smiled. It wasn't a miracle, but it was movement. If you're reading this and you've ever felt that quiet fear, that sense that you're fading, you're not alone. George's story isn't special because it's dramatic. It's special because it's real, because it's the story of millions of people quietly choosing to fight back against time in the most human way possible, one small habit at a time. Sometimes it begins with fruit and faith. George didn't sleep that night. It wasn't the back pain this time, or the soft creak of the wind brushing against the side of the house. It was the silence inside his own head, the kind that doesn't feel like peace, but like absence. He lay there beside Helen, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, and felt like a passenger in his own life, drifting, watching, disconnected. The next morning, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched fruit. The colors looked dull. The kitchen felt cold. He didn't eat. Helen noticed, but said nothing. She just slid the bowl closer to him and walked out to the porch. That day was different. By mid-afternoon, the fog in his mind had thickened. He misplaced the television remote, then forgot he had already fed the dog when Helen called from the other room, asking if he'd seen her keys. He snapped, "I don't know. Helen, I don't know where anything is anymore." The sharpness of his voice startled them both. A brittle silence followed. George stood in the center of the living room, shoulders hunched, breath shallow. Helen stood at the edge of the hallway, her expression unreadable. The tension between them, heavy as stone. "I'm sorry," he said. After a long pause, his voice breaking. I'm scared." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Helen didn't move at first, then she stepped forward slowly and wrapped her arms around him, not as a wife trying to fix something, but as a woman who understood what it felt like to lose pieces of the person you love, one invisible sliver at a time. Later that evening, they sat on the porch together. George stared at the trees, his hands resting heavily in his lap. "What if it doesn't matter?" he said softly. "What if all this fruit, vitamins, walking? What if none of it works? What if I just keep fading anyway?" Helen didn't answer right away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, one of George 20 years ago, holding their daughter during a camping trip. His face lit by a fire, strong whole. "I've watched you carry this family for decades," she said, "and I'll carry you if I have to. But I think maybe we just carry each other now." George looked at the photo, and for the first time, he allowed the grief to rise, not just for the man he used to be, but for the man he was afraid he wouldn't get to become. He'd been fighting so hard to hold on to something static. But maybe aging wasn't about freezing time. Maybe it was about learning how to keep living through change, through fear, through quiet decline. That night, something shifted. Not in the body, but in the soul. He realized that resilience isn't about being strong all the time. It's about showing up in the moments when you feel weakest. It's about eating the fruit, walking the path, choosing hope, even when it feels like it doesn't matter. The next morning, George got up early. He went into the kitchen and quietly sliced the kiwi, then the apple, then the papaya. He set the bowl in front of Helen before she even came downstairs. When she entered, still tying her robe, she paused, surprised. "Breakfast is ready," he said, his voice calm. She smiled, kissed his cheek, and sat down beside him. They ate in silence, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like momentum, like movement, like life. By the end of the week, the fog lifted. Not completely, but enough for George to feel like himself again. The fruit became ritual, a symbol, a small act of self-respect. He wasn't chasing youth anymore. He was anchoring himself to vitality, not perfection, but presence. And something beautiful started to happen. Neighbors who hadn't seen him walking in months began waving again as he made his morning rounds. He started reading books again slowly, but with attention. He remembered the names of old war buddies from his Navy days. One afternoon, while tossing the ball for his dog, he even broke into a jog just for a few steps. Helen clapped from the porch. That night, she leaned over and whispered, "You seem lighter lately." George exhaled. "I think I stopped trying to win." and just started living again. For anyone out there who feels what George felt, who's afraid the best parts of themselves are behind them, there's something you should know. You're not fading, you're transitioning. And there's a version of you on the other side of fear, waiting to be rediscovered. Sometimes it just starts with breakfast. If you're ready, I'll continue with Chapter 4, the turning point in George's emotional and physical recovery. Would you like me to begin? George didn't expect the turning point to come at a grocery store. He was just there for eggs and almond milk, standing in the produce aisle, comparing two slightly overpriced cartons of blueberries. When he heard someone behind him say, "Excuse me, sir, do you know if those are the organic ones?" He turned to see a woman, early 70s, gray streaks in her curls, steady blue eyes. She smiled. "I can't read the tiny print anymore," George chuckled. "You and me both." They both leaned in to squint at the label, and after a few seconds of joint confusion, George pulled out his reading glasses and handed her the carton. "We've got antioxidants. Either way," she laughed. "Right? The little brain berries." Then, almost casually, she added, "You eat these every day." "I do now," George replied. "Doctor's orders and my wife's." The woman nodded. "Smart man. My husband didn't listen to me, and now he's struggling to remember our granddaughter's name." The sentence hit George in the chest like a soft blow. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. She waved it off with a sad smile. "We all fade. Eventually, I'm just trying to slow it down." When she walked away, George stood there for a long moment holding the carton of blueberries in his hand. What she said kept echoing. We all fade, eventually. He knew that, but it reminded him why he'd started all this, not to avoid aging, but to keep showing up for life as long as it let him. That evening, George took a longer walk, not for exercise, just for himself. The air was cool, the sky wide and golden. Every step felt like proof that he was still in motion. The next day, he found his journal. He hadn't touched it in years. Its pages were yellowing, spine cracked, but it still held the last thing he wrote, an entry from the day after his retirement. "I wonder what's next." George opened to a new page. He wrote, "This morning, I remembered my neighbor's name before she told me, and I didn't feel tired when I climbed the stairs. I feel present." That single line changed everything. Each morning, he began writing something small. Winds, feelings, the flavor of the fruit he ate, the avocado that actually made him feel full until noon, the papaya that helped him after dinner, the pomegranate juice that left a surprising sweetness in his throat. He didn't realize it, but he was building something. A record, a rhythm, a life again. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, George found his old camera gear, dust-covered, neglected. But when he picked it up, the weight in his hands felt familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend, He spent the next hour in the backyard, taking pictures of birds, of Helen's roses, of the way the sunlight poured through the maple leaves like melted glass. For the first time in years, he lost track of time, not from confusion, but from joy. That night at dinner, George said something he hadn't said in years. "I feel good." Helen paused mid-bite. "Yeah." He nodded. "I forgot how good it feels, just to be awake." She reached across the table, gently squeezed his hand. "You're coming back." George didn't reply, but she was right. And the beauty was, he hadn't realized how far gone he'd been until he started returning. By the end of the month, George had a new morning ritual: 6 fruits, a walk with Helen journal entry, coffee with the news. On Sundays, he made smoothies for both of them: apples, blueberries, avocado, a splash of pomegranate juice. He called it the longevity blend. He no longer feared the fog coming back. It might still try, but now he had tools, habits, a foundation, and more than that, he had proof. Proof that change was possible. That healing wasn't a lightning strike, but a quiet sunrise, one that returned slowly, inch by inch, until you could see again. There's a moment in every person's life where they choose what story they're going to live next. For George, that choice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was a bowl of fruit, a pen, a long walk under an autumn sky, and it was enough. The first snow came early that year. George stood by the front window, coffee in hand, watching the quiet flakes settle over the street like powdered sugar. Helen was still asleep upstairs, curled under the quilt their daughter had made. The house was silent, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels earned. It had been almost 6 months since that doctor's appointment. 6 months of bowls filled with color. 6 months of walks and journals, and quiet mornings where George didn't dread the mirror. He still had his slow days, the occasional ache in his back, a name or two that slipped his mind. But the difference now was he had stopped bracing for the worst. He was present in the now, and that made all the difference. One evening, his granddaughter Ella came to visit. She was 10, full of questions and glitter and stories about school. "Grandpa, what's the secret to living so long?" she asked, her eyes wide. George smiled. "Small things, repeated often." She wrinkled her nose. "That sounds boring." He chuckled. "Then you're doing it wrong." They made smoothies together that night. She measured out the blueberries. He sliced the apples. She wrinkled her nose again at the avocado, but he winked and said, "You'll thank me later." After she went home, George sat in his chair and opened his journal. He didn't write about the fruits anymore. He didn't need to. The habit was part of him now. Instead, he wrote what he wished someone had told him sooner. Aging isn't the end of the road. It's the part of the journey where the view gets clearer. You don't need to sprint. You just need to keep moving. Eat well. Love harder. Be present. That's how you live long. That's how you live well. He closed the journal and looked around the room. Same house, same furniture, same walls. But it all felt different now. Because he was different now. That winter, George didn't just survive, he flourished. He took up photography again, reached out to old friends, even helped start a walking group for local seniors in the neighborhood. They called it the Fruit Loop, a name he pretended to hate, but secretly loved. He didn't tell them about the doctor's warning, or the fear that used to sit in his chest like a stone, because that wasn't his story anymore. His story now was about showing up, about fighting for health, not because you're scared of dying, but because you still love living. There are thousands of Georges out there, men and women who feel the fog setting in, who think they're too far gone, too tired, too late to change anything. But George's story is proof. It's never too late to come back to yourself. All it takes is one small habit, one good choice, one bowl of blueberries, one walk, one reason. Maybe this is your sign. Maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe your next chapter starts today. And if you need a place to begin, start with something simple. Eat these 6 fruits daily after 60, because quietly, without you even noticing, they just might help you live longer, and more importantly, live better. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you're ready to take the next small step in your own health journey, stick around. We're just getting started.